Welcome into the All Things Mizzou podcast presented by Missouri Tigers on SI. I'm Joey Van Zummeren, one of your football reporters here, joined as always by Michael Stamp. Heading into the second or third week of crossover season with both men's basketball and football going on. Football getting ready to take on South Carolina for what will be probably the biggest game for the rest of its season, depending on where this game against South Carolina places it for the postseason hopes. But either way, for the regular season, probably the ranked matchup, unless Arkansas doesn't something crazy over these next 2 weeks here. Coming off a massive win over Oklahoma, and then men's basketball heading through its non-conference schedule. Just got a win over Eastern Washington today. As you're watching this, they'll be taking on Mississippi Valley State, but they're 2-1 right now. Still not sure what to make of that team after that game in Memphis to start the year. By the way, 2-1 is 2-1. So exciting things to talk about today. Michael, how are you feeling? I mean, starting with this football team, how are you feeling about this football team after a crazy one there?
I mean, it's definitely not an understatement at this point. What we've seen in the past and looking at these last three games to say that, in this season as a whole, the South Carolina matchup is going to be the most important game of the season. I mean, on paper, Missouri should be able to beat Mississippi State, and Arkansas is not an easy team, and we've seen what this team has done with some games that they probably should have won easier, but should be able to beat Arkansas as well. And South Carolina is, like Eli Drinkwitz said, and many others have said, they're hitting their stride right at the perfect time right now, which probably not the best if you're looking for a win heading into a pretty hostile environment again. And, I think a key thing with this matchup is you can look at how good each team is and who's better, and, is Missouri better, is South Carolina better? But a very true statement is that Missouri has played pretty terribly on the road this year. Honestly, it seems like everything that could have gone wrong against Alabama and Texas A&M went wrong. They were just really, really ugly football games. And if you're South Carolina and you're looking for another resume building win, that's pretty enticing, right? That a team that struggled on the road all season's coming to town. It's the flip side for Missouri. You have to, maybe do something different or figure something out to make these road games work, because now more than ever, especially when there, probably still is a very narrow, windy path to the college football playoff, which again, probably don't want to get into the, analytics of that, but there probably is a path in the, grand scheme of things. And it starts with beating South Carolina, and probably, I don't think Missouri is going to win handily, but that would certainly help. Regardless, I think if you lose this one, those hopes are, diminished. Therefore, making it the most important game of the year.
Yeah, I mean, 2 games for Mizzou on the road where they looked just absolutely unprepared. And obviously the Alabama game, Drew Pine being thrown into the middle of that doesn't help with that one. But like you mentioned, Michael, the South Carolina team, it's hard to say they can really make too strong of a playoff pitch. But, Heather Dinich on the Pat McAfee show saying yesterday she would hesitate to keep them out if they went out. And honestly, they're 10-point favorites against Missouri this week. Next up on their schedule is Wolford. And then at the end of the year, they have that rivalry on the road against Clemson. And that's going to be a really tough game. But their schedule is so interesting so far, because when they lost when they only won by 4 over Old Dominion, it was a lot of people have kind of gave up on them, decided it was going to be a lost season for South Carolina. Did not look good. Looked like the Lenore Sellers project wasn't going to work. And then they go on the very next week, beat Kentucky 31-6. They lose to LSU only by 3. They get blown out by Ole Miss, but only lose to Alabama by 2, blow out Oklahoma, upset Texas A&M by 22 points, upset Vanderbilt by 20 or 21-point win there. So, like Eli Drinkwitz said, and as you regurgitated, Michael, this South Carolina team, you talk about playing your best football at the right time. They're absolutely doing that in this moment. And so I think that if you're Mizzou, though, that's all you can ask for, because a few weeks ago when we were looking at the schedule to end off the year for Missouri, it's like, where are they going to be able to find a real signature win? And South Carolina certainly isn't going to, I don't see, even if they win against South Carolina, I don't think it's going to rocket them up in the college football playoff rankings. But, it's not going to be what Ole Miss got against Georgia last week, where they were able to, they were in the 20s, low teens of the first rankings. They beat Georgia, and then all of a sudden they're in the playoff picture, very much alive. So Missouri doesn't quite have that. But again, like you mentioned, if there's a path to the playoffs with Missouri, it starts with beating South Carolina. It reminds me of a few years ago when the Chargers, or it was the Colts, were involved in a very contentious AFC playoff race. I believe it was the first year of the seventh seed being involved in the NFL. And, there was the Colts were a team where they just needed a lot of things to happen, a lot of things to break their way. And Philip Rivers was asked about it, asked if you'd pay attention to it. And he said, he was quarterback for the Colts for the time, obviously. And he said, well, every single one of those scenarios involves us winning this week. So ultimately, Indianapolis didn't end up making playoffs. They won that game, and the things didn't end up breaking their way. So I don't know what lesson Missouri could really take away from that. But either way, they have to go 1-0, and they have to win their game. And looking at this game against Oklahoma, looking back at that one, I mean, this team is just, at the very least, like we said in our post-game reaction video, Michael, this team is really entertaining, really gritty, to steal a term from Eli Drinkwitz, and really impressed with Drew Pine in this one. Obviously, in the first half, I feel like a lot of things that we're breaking down were just a cause of the offensive line, not great protection. They were just trying a lot of bootleg stuff that just wasn't there. His wide receivers and tight ends weren't helping him too much out either. Brett Norfleet had one or two drops and another that almost dropped again. A lot of execution errors. They had a lot of special teams errors. And then so many times to feel like they were kind of done and out. They come back. Drew Pine, that drive where they score the last offensive touchdown, two incredible throws to Luther Burden and then to Theo Weiss. He underthrows Luther a little bit. It could have been a touchdown, but what can you ask for? A 33-yard pass on 3rd and 16. And then the one to Theo, the next play on the fade in the right corner of the end zone. Probably two of the best passes we've seen from Mizzou quarterback this year. And again, Eli Drinkwitz took the opportunity to go out there and give a strong defense of Drew Pine after he had taken some heat the week prior, or 2 weeks prior, against Alabama with 3 interceptions. And I mean, I don't know what to make of this. I asked you after the game, Michael, what can this team really take forward from this one? And obviously, I mean, it's what they've claimed to know about themselves all year, that they can win games like this. They're 8-0 in one-score games over the past 2 years, that they really stick together in those tough moments. But I do think we saw exactly what I had talked to before this game, where I had said you can win games with Drew Pine, and you can win, especially if Nate Noel is involved. But you can win games with Drew Pine, and I still felt confident saying that after the Alabama game. He just could not turn it over, and had to make some big throws. And that's exactly what happened in the second half there, of getting the run game involved, and that set up everything for them. And then he absolutely made some big time throws. He did not turn the ball over once, which is really impressive for him in this one. Michael, just your thoughts from that game.
I mean, yeah, it's hard to take away a lot from that, because it still just wasn't very pretty on, from either team. And, we can go defensively, that this defense has shown time in and time out, except for maybe in the late stages of the Alabama game and against Texas A&M, that they're probably one of the better defenses in the country. And, they did about as good of a job as you could ask for getting to the quarterback. Secondary didn't have to do much, because Jackson Arnold wasn't really, honestly, throwing the ball that much. Again, I mean, you have to think their one offensive touchdown is kind of a fluky trick play, which is a great play design, and obviously great throw from Taylor Tatum to Jackson Arnold, but still kind of a fluky play. It's not your traditional Arnold drops back situation. So secondary, I mean, I guess did their job. Weren't any, super big plays. I think a couple running backs had 50, 40 yards. So maybe you critique that, but for the most part, no large chunk offensive plays from the defense. And you give, we touched on this, after the game. You give so many guys credit. You give Tristan Newsom credit. the entire defensive line. Dalen Carnell, the list just Corey Flagg had 14 tackles or something like that. The list goes on and on of the defense. On offense, I mean, I don't know what more you can ask from Drew Pine. He did his job. The key principle being do not turn the ball over. If he throws an interception at any point in the second half when momentum is starting to pick up offensively for Missouri, he throws his first touchdown. Maybe Missouri fans are thinking, oh, there's some rhythm to this offense. Maybe he can do it. Interception, the stadium, life of the stadium is sucked out, and who knows what happens after that. So momentum-wise and just, for the sake of the game, he can't throw an interception, and he doesn't. So I don't know what more you can ask from him. He, in all honesty, might have over-delivered, especially compared to definitely compared to people's expectations heading into this, because if we're going to be real honest, I think there's probably a lot of people out there who did not think Drew Pine had 3 touchdowns, especially, some of the caliber of throws that he made, in that fourth quarter. I think it's safe to say a lot of people didn't think he had that in him. And I'm sure the belief from his team and his coaching staff was there. Never going to doubt that by any means. But there was certainly some doubt from the fan base. And maybe that's justifiable based on what we saw against Alabama. It's up for interpretation, but he delivered, maybe even over-delivered. Not much more you can ask from your quarterback than to throw 3 clutch touchdowns and a couple other clutch throws to lead your team down the field when you need it.
Right, exactly. With Drew Pine, Eli Drinkwitz said after the game, we need to stop reacting to every play. And unfortunately, in the age of social media, and in our field, the every second news cycle, I don't think that's a realistic expectation. But I absolutely see where he's coming from in that department. So get the win over Oklahoma. I thought Jamal Roberts had a fantastic game. Offensively, was really the lead back in this one, with Nate Noel still pretty limited. Noel told us earlier this week he's getting closer to 100%, which would be huge for the South Carolina game. But I thought Jamal played great besides that one fumble. You mentioned that play, the fumble 6 that Mizzou ends up getting. It's a great play by Tristan Newsome. I don't know how much of it is just kind of luck with where he and Jackson Arnold was positioned, because it's basically Newsome's right shoulder, I believe, that's kind of diving into right where Jackson Arnold is holding the ball. And really, yes, you have better ball security in that moment. But then Corey Flagg, the linebacker, also shouted out Christian Williams, defense tackle, for being able to secure that block for Zion Young to get him into the end zone on that one. So great play all around, great execution. It's part of it is luck, as there is in a lot of football moments. But then again, they absolutely make the most of it with their execution. So good game for Mizzou. As you mentioned, though, the whole entire game was basically in the last 3 minutes. It's not a lot, a lot of stuff in the first half not to like, that they're going to have to continue to work on. But again, I think we saw what this offense can do if they have the right game plan for Drew Pine in there. Looking ahead to this game against South Carolina now, obviously we mentioned Nate Noel getting close to 100%. Brady Cook is listed as doubtful on this first availability report, issued Wednesday. So we'll see what happens with that. Eli Drinkwitz said on Tuesday that they're going to prepare this week as if Drew Pine is starter. Down in Columbia, South Carolina, Shane Beamer is saying that it doesn't really matter who is in at quarterback because they just run a lot of outside zone, and that kind of sets up everything else for them. And I asked him about that on the SEC call, and he did have some logical explanation on just the athletic ability of Missouri's offensive line and how they can really push you around, and both pass and rush game. And obviously the wide zone running game is going to set you up really well for the play action. However, there is obviously some tangible difference with the experience from Brady Cook to Drew Pine, not only within Missouri's system, but also just starting period. This is Brady Cook's third year as a starter. Drew Pine is in the same year as him, but has not had as much starting experience, and I think that's evident. So we'll see with that this week. As far as Brady Cook's status, again, Eli Drinkwitz was asked yesterday, did Drew Pine give him enough confidence in the Oklahoma game that where Brady Cook is only going to go out there if he is at 100% or close to it, and he's just said whoever is going to give us the best chance is going to be that guy. And I think it's difficult to say too much without knowing the full details of Brady's injury and where he's really at. But I think there would at least be a little bit more confidence in him, even though they're always going to say that they've always had confidence in him. But at least a little bit more to see him go out there and actually do it, to be able to say, Brady, again, unless he can fully contribute, maybe he'll still even be a little bit limited. But at least if he can play to his best ability, give Mizzou a better chance than Drew Pine, then obviously he'll go out there. And again, there's a lot of rumors flying around, as there always is going to be in situations where there's just vague reports when all we get each week is either doubtful, questionable, probable, or out or in. But just have to take it one day at a time with this and see what we get there. I thought on Wednesday, this time last week before Oklahoma, that Brady Cook was going to play solely because he was listed as questionable on the injury report, compared to Wednesday against Alabama, where he's listed as doubtful on the Wednesday injury report, and then he ended up playing. So difficult to tell, and obviously now he's dealing with 2 injuries. We don't know which one is lingering for him at all. But the one thing that we do have to go off of is Eli Drinkwitz saying a few weeks ago on the SEC call that he expects Brady Cook to return for Mizzou at some point this season. So got to stay patient on that front there. Looking ahead to the South Carolina game, we talked a little bit about them at the start, playing the best football at the right moment. Michael, what do you make of this offense for South Carolina? I think we talked about the bumps in the road for them and kind of just the windy curve, and I think nobody really can represent that better than Lenore Sellers and the play he's had at quarterback this year.
Yeah, it seems like he's, steadily improved, I guess, as the season's gone on. I mean, definitely looked a little shaky against LSU and maybe even Ole Miss, but really good game against Alabama. Follows it up with a really good game against Oklahoma. Then a good game against A&M. Then a good game against good game against Vanderbilt. He's pretty efficient, good arm talent, but it seems like every quarterback Missouri has played has been talked about for his running talent, and I don't think that's any different with Lenore Sellers. He is a big guy. He's 6'3", 242, which for a mobile quarterback seems pretty unusual for the most part. And you could tell, he's still gaining experience as time goes on. He's only a freshman, so you can tell he's getting more comfortable and adapting in the pocket and that sort of thing as time goes on. But I have a feeling he's going to look the most comfortable he's looked against Missouri, just based on the trends and how much improvement he's showing game to game. That being said, the Missouri defensive line has a pretty good knack for getting to quarterbacks, and South Carolina's offensive line is, according to PFF, not one of the best in the SEC. They have the 16th. They have the worst run blocking grade, and then the 14th ranked pass blocking grade. So maybe you can have some opportunities to get to the quarterback there. I mentioned the run blocking. The running back, Rocket Sanders, is also going to get a lot of attention. He has been pretty darn good this season, 696 yards and 10 touchdowns. He's another just big guy, same as Sellers, hard to bring down. Missouri's played him multiple times. He's been at Arkansas his entire career up until this point. This is his 4th year, so last 3 years at Arkansas, and he's been pretty darn good every season when he's healthy, and he's been healthy this year. So put two and two together, he's having a pretty darn good year. Sellers likes to run, like I said, but outside of that, not really any other threats there. And it seems like the SEC is loaded with really talented receiving cores. Not that this one isn't. They're led by Joshua Simon, their tight end. I think Mazzeo Bennett Jr., he's a true freshman receiver, hasn't probably got the attention he deserves yet. 289 yards, 3 touchdowns. Interesting target there. Joshua Simon, the tight end, 357 yards, 5 touchdowns. So it's a good receiving core. They certainly have options. Raheem Sanders is their third string receiver, so there's no, they're not afraid to give him the ball, in the receiving game. After those three, you have some, it's a bunch of guys that are solid, but nothing that stands out. So, I mean, we've seen really, really talented receivers and some that have lit up this Missouri secondary, but I'm not going to make a forecast or prediction or anything, but this is not the most talented group. They're still good. I'm not going to underplay it by any means. I think the emphasis is really going to be on Rocket Sanders running the ball and Lenore Sellers running the ball and, kind of Sellers' passing ability in that third option there.
Yeah, Lenore Sellers, you mentioned his size and physicality. I mean, just similar to Diego Pavia, he looks like Cam Newton with just his body size. Josh Allen type. I'm not going to compare him to Josh Allen or Cam Newton, but just a difficult guy to bring down in the run game. And then Rocket Sanders just has such a unique running style. To me, he almost looks like he's doing high knees all the time. Just a hard physical runner. I don't know what guy to compare it to. So tough to bring both those guys down, and could really, just with the running styles of both of them, could really wear down a defense. And then you have the tight end, like you mentioned, Michael Joshua Simmons, to give them an option in the passing game there. Looking over to the defensive side of things for this one, Michael, they have some stars there. They have great safety. What stands out to you on that side of the ball for the Gamecocks?
Well, I mean, not that PFF grades are the end-all be-all for how good a football team is, but just for, on the other end of those stat lines when the offensive line grades weren't good, the best pass rush grade in the SEC, middle of the pack run defense, but they have the second highest rated defense in the SEC. So it is not a unit you really, want to mess around with. You think Missouri's defensive line is good. South Carolina's is as good or better. Kyle Kennard, Georgia Tech transfer, been outstanding so far this year. True freshman Dylan Stewart, been outstanding this year. He has 6 sacks. Kennard, excuse me, has 9.5. Tonka Hemingway, TJ Sanders on the defensive line, or in the defensive interior. They have 7 sacks between the two of them. Another defensive end, Brian Thomas Jr. It's just one of those things where it seems like the list goes on and on and on. You go down to, Jalon Kilgore and Nick Emanwari in the secondary, very talented defensive backs. It's kind of hard to pinpoint a weakness, honestly, in this defense. Very talented across the board. Interesting blend of, experience and youth, which I always find interesting. I mean, it's not always the easiest for true freshmen and, true sophomores and that sort of thing to, get into a defense early, especially in the SEC when basically every team is loaded up with, 4 and 5-star talent. So pretty impressive on that side of things. Nick Emanwari has 4 interceptions. Jalen Kilgore has 3. O'Donnell Fortune, that's got to be a candidate for some sort of all-name team. He also has 3 interceptions. DQ Smith, who was, I believe, listed on the injury report as probable, so seems like he's going to play, but he has 30 tackles this season, so he's a key part of that defense. So talented defense. I mean, like I said, it's I think it's widely considered one of the better ones in the conference. Regardless of who it is at quarterback, he's going to have his hands full evading pressure and avoiding those defensive backs.
I think this game in the SEC is definitely going to be true for the old coach adage of the game being won in the trenches with both these fronts. Now, something we didn't mention that I meant to at the top was Missouri did lose center Connor Charleston for the rest of the season. Experienced starter there, and they're replacing him with Drake Heismeyer as they did in that game against Oklahoma. So unfortunate loss for Missouri. However, the rest of the offensive line is remaining healthy. Caden Green, who was dealing with the injury against Alabama, and then in the week leading up to Oklahoma, is off the injury report now. Logan Riker was also listed as on the injury report last week. He's taken off that now as a depth piece. So they're getting healthier besides Tolleson. They have Drake Heismeyer to replace them, who has been in the program for quite a few years now. So we'll see how that adjustment is made. Against Oklahoma, Drake Heismeyer came in. I haven't went back and rewatched the game yet, but didn't really see a notable drop off in real time when he was in there. But either way, it's going to be a different adjustment for them, and we'll see, especially with having a different quarterback in there as well. And fortunately, I would venture to think that Drake Heismeyer has more snapping reps with Drew Pine than Brady Cook just because of working with the second team. But definitely something to watch. We saw last year with Tolleson, even though he was experienced, definitely had some snapping issues, had a few high snaps, had a few even under center issues with Brady Cook. So we'll see if Heismeyer is up to the challenge with Drew Pine. But those little errors can definitely kill you. You can see timing all the time, just a matter of seconds with quarterbacks, centers, and then even quarterbacks to running backs handing those balls off. So we'll see how that transition goes for Missouri. But back to my original point, with the strength of the South Carolina front seven, and then this on both sides, really, I think those two sides can win the game for either side, really. If the Missouri defensive line is able to have another great game and contain the South Carolina run game, especially, I think that'll be a big help. And then kind of same with South Carolina, front seven. If they're able to continuously take away the run game from Missouri, then going to become really challenging for Drew Pine for all that he showed against Oklahoma. The key for him in this offense is still to have that run game going. So going to be an interesting matchup this week. We talked about the significance of it at the top. But yeah, for both of these teams, really is going to dictate how the rest of their season is going to go. And obviously for South Carolina, looking to get one last push up there before their game at Clemson to round off the season. Michael, any other thoughts on this matchup before we move on to Dennis Gates' squad?
Yeah, again, I'm not one to make predictions, and I think this is one of those games where even if I wanted to, I don't think I could. It seems like a pretty evenly matched battle, and I feel like a lot of the strength for one team carries over to the other team. A lot of, not saying these are the same football teams by any means, because they're not, but definitely some similarities. Like I said, if I wanted to give you a prediction, I couldn't. I think this is two pretty evenly matched teams. I think that's reflected, in the AP poll and the college football playoff rankings. Obviously, those are two teams who are either right next to each other, a couple spots away from each other. So I think this is two pretty evenly matched teams, and again, should be a fun game. Like we've said, this Missouri team's been pretty entertaining recently, and I have a gut feeling that won't be any different, hopefully, this time around. So I think just the big thing is I'm not questioning routines or anything like that, but whatever their road trip routine looks like, not saying it needs to be changed by any means, but clearly what they did with Alabama and A&M just didn't work. So maybe if there's something there that can be adjusted, that might be the time to implement that.
Right, exactly. And Williams-Brice Stadium it's not Kyle Field, but it's not an easy stadium to play in either. So Mizzou, like I said, 10-point underdogs in that one. We'll see if they once again are able to pull it off. Moving on to Mizzou basketball, like we mentioned, 2-1 on the year now. Went over to Eastern Washington most recently. Career performance from Caleb Grill with 33 points and 8 3-pointers. And again, still hard to make a lot about this team, but I guess before we get there, Michael, let's talk about the future of this team. Early signing today, got 2 guys from the class of 2025 to officially sign today, with Aaron Rowe, a Columbia product, and then also Nicholas Randall from the St. Louis area. Both two things that Dennis Gates talked about with both of them was just the recruiting areas. With Aaron Rowe, the fact that he has a support system in place with him, that he's going to be close to home. And then with Nicholas Randall to be able to dip into that St. Louis pool, just as it is for football to continue to grow in what is a very talent-rich city for Missouri. Michael, what can you tell us about those 2 as prospects?
Well, I mean, you kind of hit on it a little bit, but I think there's definitely an importance for, whatever team you are and whatever sport it is, to keep those local local products close to home. And, there's been some pretty good ones that come from the Columbia, St. Louis, Kansas City, or Missouri area in general recently. So always fun to see that, just, being in the area and that sort of thing. Rowe is an interesting point guard prospect, 6', 155. So obviously not the biggest guy by any means, but super athletic, very quick, very shifty, very, has that vertical ability as well. He's taken an interesting dip, down most national rankings over the last couple, adjustments. Seems like he did not have the best AAU and, grassroots season, which unfortunately or fortunately is a time where you're scouted, and, a lot of those AAU games and summer tournaments and that sort of thing really do reflect in those rankings. So I think there was a point where and I don't have the numbers on this, but there definitely was a point where he was pushing 5-star territory, or higher 4-star. Now composite ranked 79 in the country. 24/7 lists him as 132, and I believe On3 has him out of the top 130, maybe even out of the around the top 150 area. So he's taken a pretty big dip. That being said, very shifty, athletic point guard. Definitely a playmaker in some aspects, but definitely known for his scoring ability when he's efficient. I think that was kind of the issue in that AAU season. The efficiency wasn't necessarily there, but definitely, like I said, it's definitely good to keep those local guys close to home. Very talented. If he's efficient, he's on. That's kind of the story with Rowe. Nicholas Randall is a St. Louis guy. He plays for Compass Prep now, which is a pretty nationally, renowned prep basketball team with, I don't even want to, hammer off all the prospects that have played for them, but very talented team, and definitely a good place for development. I don't know what his playing time or stat line looks like there yet. I would imagine that it either hasn't started or is beginning to start here very soon. If Randall, I did a scouting story on Randall a couple of weeks back when he committed, and my big takeaway, was with his play style. If Randall was like 4 inches taller and you could justify playing him at the center position, he'd be probably higher ranked and a dream come true for anybody. Similar position to Aiden Shaw, I guess, who plays a little bit of that small ball center when he checks in for Josh Gray now. Doesn't have much of a jump shot yet. He still takes them. That part of his game not there. Really known for his intensity on the rebounding side of things. Very powerful at 6'7", 225 frame. Great rebounder. You could tell he has the knack for positioning, the knack for when to go up and get it, and instincts and that sort of thing. So that's going to be kind of his reason on the court. His defense as well. Very physical player in the paint. Not that he's going to see bigger defender or bigger forwards playing on a national level like he is with Compass Prep. So that'll be a good test to see where his defense really is at. But very good at defending those bigger forwards and thicker forwards. Offensively, most of it comes around the rim. He has some post moves and has a decent finishing touch, but pretty opposite traits for Rowe and Randall. Randall's really going to be known for his rebounding and defense and his physicality and strength. Rowe at the point guard spot definitely needs to put on a little bit of weight. I don't know exactly what his measurements are at this very moment. 24/7 lists him at 155 pounds. That's pretty, it's on the lighter side of things, obviously. So I would hope that's one of the first things that gets addressed when he's on campus, is that weight, strength and conditioning side of things, because he's gonna get thrown around a little bit if he's coming in at 155 at the start of the next season. So that being said, part of his game is that shiftiness and that quickness and burst. So we've got to find a balance, but his athleticism, speed, burst, quickness, and then tough shot making and that sort of thing is kind of his claim to fame.
Looking at this current team here, it felt like this game against Eastern Washington and Howard, it's just, with this non-con play, it's just always about eliminating bad play against Howard. It's just a terrible three-point shot efficiency. I think they were something like 2 for 20. I want to say somewhere in that range, whatever it was, really bad. And then in the next game, pretty much just because of Caleb Grill. They do a lot better in that department. And, again, eliminating that bad play from game to game and also just finding your identity as a team. And I think we definitely saw much more of a step forward in that against Eastern Washington with Caleb Grill's big day. And then also, I thought it was interesting to see Marcus Allen get a little bit more involved. I mean, he only played 14 minutes, but that was more than any freshman. He's averaging more than any other freshman on the team right now. And it really feels like he could emerge as a guy in that freshman class to step up and get consistent playing time in this one. Although it does feel like Peyton Marshall has kind of been that guy when they play a center that has been relief for Josh Gray in there as well. When he first came in the game against Eastern Washington, I think first few things he did was have a foul, and then he had one other mistake. But other than that, been playing clean, and he'll obviously grow throughout the season. But again, Marcus Allen feels like the guy that could emerge from that freshman class. With Caleb Grill, I think if he can end up, obviously, don't expect him to score 8 3-point shots every night, but if he can be, somewhat close to that guy every night, continue to be a consistent force on both ends of the court. He has defensive ability, but then also with the 3-point shot, really lead the team energetically. That could almost be maybe a surprise for Mizzou fans. I think Dennis Gates and the coaching staff has always kind of went into the season with that as a plan for Caleb Grill, but maybe a surprise for Mizzou fans to see him struggle against Memphis, see him struggle in the first few minutes against Howard, and that's ultimately what ended up getting him benched by Dennis Gates. Really feels like that could be a unknown or a surprise commodity and a big part of this Mizzou team's identity. And that was the same last year with him when he went out. He was the team rode or died with him a little bit on just his emotional play. Sometimes they cost him. He fouled out against I think it was Pitt or Minnesota, one of those games, for just a behavioral mistake. I can't remember exactly what he did, and I don't want to accuse him of anything he didn't, but just kind of letting the emotions get the best of him. And Dennis Gates, I believe after that game, said he wants more of those moments from Caleb Grill. He wants, a more mean, aggressive team. Obviously, you want to play clean, but that Caleb Grill can really be the energetic leader for this team. And on Monday, it was in the form of his just getting hot in the 3-point game. Can be in other ways on other nights, as Dennis Gates talked about after that one. So, Michael, what have your main takeaways been with this team through 3 games now?
Yeah, I don't know if this is too critical or not critical enough, but through 3, and I know it's only 3 games, but this is the point of the season where you're figuring out, where your team needs to grow before you get to conference play, or in Missouri's case, that California, Kansas, and then a couple games later, that Illinois. That stretch of games, you're going to want to, get a couple of those, obviously. So you kind of have to figure out where your team needs to grow and do that, complete that growth before or around that time. So you're hitting your stride there. Then obviously into SEC play. That being said, I don't think I've seen enough through 3 games to tell me that I'm not watching the same team I watched last year. 7-point win over Eastern Washington, and then a 15-point win over Howard. And then, you look at Memphis, that team's up at 10, 12, 14 at halftime, and you end up, losing by 8. I mean, Howard and Eastern Washington, based on the talent levels, should not be hanging around with Missouri. And there's no doubt that it's a talented roster, top to bottom, from the guys who aren't playing. I mean, you have guys like Marquez Warwick and Jacob Cruz, who I would imagine are not playing the number of minutes. Jacob Cruz is playing 6.3 and Warwick 7.7. I would imagine I don't know if they thought they'd be playing more or less, but Marquez Warwick was one of the leading scorers in the country last year. Jacob Cruz was one of the best 3-point shooters in the country last year. So much talent. I think that struggle is finding out how to utilize all the talent, because there is an overabundance of it, and figure out who needs to go where. And I think against Eastern Washington, you saw a little bit of that. It's clear now that Ant Robinson and Aiden Shaw have roles in this, this rotation, deservingly so. They've exceeded, I would maybe say exceeded people's expectations so far. You mentioned Marcus Allen. Maybe not the freshman people thought would jump off and jump out at people, but defensively he's been pretty darn good so far. Caleb Grill as well. I mean, when he's on, and clearly when he's off, because those first 2 games were probably not, as good as he wanted to shoot. But if you can get a game like you got against, Eastern Washington once every few games, maybe it makes a payoff worth it. A guy like Caleb Grill and what he's good at, you don't need 8 threes a game, but you need probably 2 or 3 or 4 from him a game. Shooting better than like 20% from the field, just because he's capable of making them. And you have to keep that shot selection clean as well. But generally, I think I've said this before. It's still just kind of a challenge to pinpoint what the issue is. It's like, why are these teams like Eastern Washington, like Howard, why are they hanging around? Because Howard was a 4-point game down that stretch until, things just, go Missouri's way. But why are these teams hanging around? If Caleb Grill doesn't explode for, 33 points and 8 3-pointers, you're looking at your second loss of the season, right? I mean, you lose 50 points or 30 points, of scoring. Not that wouldn't be picked up, but I think, you get the point. Why are these teams hanging around? Maybe it's a defensive issue. Maybe it's an adjustments issue when they're close at halftime, finding out what's going wrong, still finding those rotations. Like I said, I personally, I struggle to pinpoint the issue as just one glaring issue. Defensively, I think things could be a little sharper. They looked, solid against Memphis. It was a scrappy game. That zone, that 1-3-1 or 2-3 zone, alternating in and out of that, forcing Memphis to take shots from the perimeter and, contested shots they weren't going in. That completely changed in the second half. But, signs that can work. Man-to-man defense might not be this team's strength. You have guys who can defend. Going back to Marcus Allen, Caleb Grill is not bad. Obviously, Aiden Shaw, Ant Robinson as well. So there's guys who can defend. But, that needs to be cleaned up. And one more thing. I think the fact that Tamar Bates is averaging 13 points a game is criminal. He is the best scorer on this team. We saw that in the back half of last season. I don't know how many points he averaged once he finally came alive in his role, but really him and Shawnee led that offense in scoring. He should be leading this team in scoring. He should be getting more shots than anybody. The offense should almost revolve around him. And, not a head coach. And obviously there's multiple guys in that team who could score, and, different games and different defense that are thrown at you call for different sets and different plays and different players to perform well. But it seems like a disservice to Tamar Bates, who is as good of a scorer as he is at 3 levels, whether it's, getting to his spots on the perimeter. We know he has that mid-range in him. He can drive, and he can also get to the free throw line. He can basically do everything. And, he's a team guy. He's team-oriented. He wants to win. You'll always respect that. But I think he really needs more shots, because he seems like a guy who more consistently than anybody else offensively can be the main contributor. So I think getting him more looks might be an answer to some problems as well.
Right. Like you said, Michael, it's difficult to pinpoint exactly what the issue is with this team. And even though it didn't look like too bad of a game against Eastern Washington, you're absolutely right. I mean, let me pull up the scoring chart here. It was, that's the first half, but with, let's see, 2:05 remaining, Eastern Washington made a basket, made a layup to make it 72-77, which is concerning. And, they commit 2 fouls. They send Mizzou to the free throw line for 4 shots. They make all 4 of them for Missouri. And that was really the problem for Eastern Washington in that second half, is whenever they were able to create a little bit of momentum, they weren't able to sustain it because they kept on getting called for fouls. So it's difficult to pinpoint exactly what the issue is for this team at this moment, and we'll have to see, because I don't disagree with you that there's much reason to believe it's a different one from what we saw last year. I think it's going to be better. I think they have more talent. I think there has been development from last year with a lot of these guys, but whether or not it's actually going to lead to different results is a different question. And like you said, again, until we get to that December stretch there, it's going to be difficult to tell. And then once they get into SEC play, the SEC is as strong as ever with basketball. I mean, just look at the rankings going on right now. So we'll have to see again, as we talked ahead of this year, nothing has changed. Just an interesting kind of pivotal year for this Mizzou men's basketball program. So that's where we're going to wrap this up for today. Like I said, Mizzou basketball takes on Mississippi Valley State tomorrow, Thursday. Today, as you're watching this, and then they get a week off. And Mizzou, South Carolina football will be an interesting week for Mizzou athletics. We appreciate you tuning into this episode of the All Things Mizzou podcast, and we hope you tune into the rest of our coverage.